Hello, everyone. My name is Natalie Nava. I am the program manager with the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Thank you for joining us today. We are in the fourth webinar in our ECRGenius webinar series. Today, we'll be talking about regulatory oversight and environmental investigation and the cleanup process. Today, CCLE is joined by Mariam Tasnif-Abbasi, who is the manager of the Brownfields program in the Department of Toxic Substances Control, as well as joined by Greg Schaefer, who is a Brownfield coordinator with DTSC as well. So I'm going to launch a poll because we wanted to get a sense of who is in the room and where you all are at, so that I'll read the question out while people are answering. Where are you at in your process of obtaining a regulatory agency oversight? Haven't started, don't know if I need regulatory oversight or what agency I should work with. I don't need regulatory oversight. This might be applicable for tribes or depending on what grant application you're doing. Or I have an agreement or have put in my request for an agreement with a regulatory agency. Oh, I just lost, let me try that again. Okay, we have a question already. So sorry, I just lost access to the polls, but it looked like we had a good mix of applicants. So anyways, I'll move on. So I want to just reintroduce Mariam Tasnif-Abbasi, since I see just a few more people joined the webinar. She is the Brownfield manager with the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And we also have Gregory Schaefer today to go over these great questions that you all have. We will have the recordings and the slides available. So if you've registered, you will get them, and we will also have them on CCLE TV on YouTube. So we'll send that link out to everybody. And then please feel free to ask any questions in the chat, and I'll keep track of them, and then we'll answer them at the end. Mariam, would you like to take it away?
Yes, I will. Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you to all of you who have joined us today for the fourth in our ECRGenius webinar series. Like Natalie said, today we're going to be talking about getting into an oversight agreement and what that means to you as a ECRG applicant. And we're going to do a very brief overview of the environmental investigation cleanup process, recognizing that we've got applicants who are very much in the know when it comes to brownfields, and we have some applicants who are not. So we really are trying to, just create capacity by providing these little mini modules. So the topics we're going to cover real quick, I'm just going to go over our some broader programs that ECRG is part of, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentations. So where is this money coming from? The Cleanup in Vulnerable Communities Initiative. I know a lot of you have heard me talk about this before. This is really more as a reference for you guys when we have these slides available for you to go through and learn about our different programs. But under this umbrella of this fairly new funding that we received from the governor's office and the legislators, the ECRG is one of many programs that DTSC is implementing to help provide equity to disadvantaged and vulnerable communities. And this is a little cheat sheet with contact information for all of the other programs. Once again, for you guys to take a look at your own leisure when you have a moment, so you can look at the different programs that we have available that are all in different states of being developed and being available for the public. ECRG, once again, contextually, I know you guys are all here because you are already in the space where you're familiar with the grant, but this is our new program available to nonprofits, tribes, and public entities who are seeking to do something with their brownfield sites in terms of revitalization for their communities. And we will be accepting applications through early April. One of the things that's really important to us is to build brownfields capacity and help the applicant community with these applications, and hopefully later on also assist with cleanup to build up. So I'm going to turn this back to Natalie for a moment to talk about CCLE's role as DTSC's Brownfield Technical Assistance Provider.
Thank you, Miriam. So the Center for Creative Land Recycling is the only national nonprofit that's solely dedicated to land reuse. And it started in California and has done a lot of work in California. They've been supporting brownfields for over 20 years. Our mission is to promote the sustainable, equitable, and responsible reuse of underutilized and environmentally impacted properties. We've assisted applicants from nonprofits, cities, tribes through group webinars, resource guides, program updates, and currently you can sign up, especially for the ECRG program, for a free 30-minute technical assistance call. And we have 4 different revitalization specialists. If you go to the next slide, please. So we have Ignacio Dairit, David Harnish, Janet Naito, and Sebastian Harrison, all with different types of expertise, from working with city staff to working in the private sector with brownfields. And a lot of them have been designing and leading some of these webinars. And I'm sure some of you all have met some of them on the TA calls. And then Devin Rainwater, Tony Torres, and Natalie Nava, myself, we are the program team staff that can help with outreach, setting up TA, getting you any information that you need. So please feel free to reach out. Devin will keep putting our contact information in the chat.
Thank you, Natalie. And I do encourage everyone to use the link right here to schedule some time to speak with CCLE's redevelopment specialists and their team, because they have a wealth of expertise and will really provide value in helping you navigate through this process. With that, I'm going to go ahead and jump in and talking about regulatory oversight. So site-specific investigations and site-specific grant applications require regulatory oversight. It was really important for us to make that an eligibility requirement for our program, because we recognize that sometimes even getting into an agreement takes time. And because our grants are so tight, we're looking at a 2-year window to get as much done as possible. It was important for us to make sure that our applicants get into the agreements prior to submitting their application, and the agreement is actually part of the application. Community-wide assessment grants, because they are super early stage, often in planning, and applicants may not know necessarily what they're going to be doing with these sites. We don't require regulatory oversight, but if you happen to have a regulatory agency engaged, that will be an eligible and allowable cost for your ECRG grant. And so the 3 different entities that you could potentially work with for oversight are the state, which is the Water Board, or us, the Department of Toxic Substances Control. Local agencies, there's many local agencies. We'll talk a little bit about what that process looks like, because there have been some very recent changes. And if we have any tribes on the line, or applicants who are potentially working with tribes, tribal environmental departments may also be utilized. We just have to make these decisions on a site-by-site, case-by-case basis. We have some new local agency oversight requirements. I'm going to turn it over to Greg, who's been taking the lead on developing this protocol for DTSC, and he can share with you information about what we're looking at, what we would advise if you'd like with a local agency for oversight. Greg?
Great. Thank you. Yeah, so Assembly Bill 304 was approved late last year in October 2021. It took effect January 1st of this year. It really supplements existing legislation in terms of notification requirements and staff reporting to the state from local agencies that derive their authority from their public health officers. There are approximately 80 of these local agencies throughout the state. And the notifications that we require them to submit to both DTSC and the Water Board are a list of their technical staff and their qualifications, including resumes of anybody who's a licensed professional. So either an engineer or a geologist is generally what we're looking at. And then site-specific information in terms of, what kind of release are they looking at entering into an agreement with, who's the responsible party, who's the property owner, and just kind of basic information. It's really a way for the state to understand the work that's being overseen at the local level. And in the past, DTSC and the Water Board didn't have as much knowledge as they would have liked to know what was going on at the local level. So AB 304 is really a way to kind of reintroduce and re-engage local agencies, as well as provide a greater level of transparency, as all of the local agency sites will now be on the Water Board's GeoTracker database, which is an online spatial database tool that's pretty common in our industry. It's really important for you to know that if you are planning on using a local agency for your environmental oversight for ECRG, there are only 4 agencies at this point that have submitted the proper notices to DTSC and the Water Board to enter into new oversight agreements at the local level. So on the next slide, we will talk about that, but we have a couple more points to go over really quick. So an important factor here is that ECRG cannot reimburse oversight costs for an unauthorized local agency. So if your agency has yet to provide the appropriate notices to both DTSC and the Water Board, it won't be an eligible cost under ECRG until that happens. And so we're asking you to encourage your local agency, if you know that you're going to be working with them, or maybe you already have an existing agreement with them, to just double check with DTC and get in contact with us as soon as possible so we can prevent any issues later down the line. And for local agencies, since they are the ones that need to comply with AB 304, we have a new quick reference guide in our quick reference guide ebook that goes over the notification requirement and also provides sample notification letters. So like I had mentioned before, there are approximately 80 local agencies throughout the state, and each one is going to have different agreements, different specifics in each of their agreements, and different processes for applying for local oversight. So we've provided a link that's through the California Department of Public Health that lists out all of the local agencies, and you can find which one. Generally, they're based at the county level, but there are some cities that also have public health officers. These local agencies, again, are the ones that must comply with AB 304. So the local agencies will notify DTSC and the Water Board before they enter into an agreement. And that's where DTSC is looking at the staffing expertise at the local level to ensure that a local agency isn't getting in over their head with a really complex project. At the same time, DTSC and the Water Board review the site specifically to see if we have any neighboring sites that might be impacting it, and seeing who would be the most appropriate agency to perform oversight. At that point, when we get notified, DTSC and the Water Board will either concur that the local agency can retain oversight, or there are specific circumstances that the state may decide to step in and say it would be more appropriate for either, again, DTSC or the Water Board to provide that oversight. So again, we're really pushing you to just let your local agency know that you're planning on applying for ECRG and their local oversight is part of your eligibility requirements. So if you have any issues with that, please get them in contact with me. My contact information will be posted along in this webinar. But right now, we also want to let you know that only the 4 local agencies that have provided these notices are Orange County Healthcare Agency, San Diego County Department of Environmental Health and Quality, Santa Clara Department of Environmental Health, and Alameda County Department of Environmental Health. So if you're looking for a local oversight from any county or state or city agency that isn't one of those 4, please get in contact with either DTSC or the local agencies themselves, and we will engage with them to make sure that happens and you don't experience any bumps along the way with your ECRG application.
Absolutely, and I think it's just we've given you a lot of information just because we want you to understand contextually what's going on. The bottom line is that it's an easy process. Once us what we're asking for, which is their staff qualifications, and they kind of comply with this fairly easy process that we have in place, which most of them were doing anyway, because this just enhances like an existing process. It shouldn't hold anything up. So as I get into the next slides and I talk about working with the Water Board and DTSC, it is a very similar overall process. And I will talk a little bit more about how to decide who to go to first and what that really means. Greg, was there anything else before we moved on to the next slide?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, and I'm going to call out Janet Naito from CCLER and ask her if there was anything that she'd like to add before we, on local agencies, before we get into working with state agencies.
That's fine.
Okay, great, thank you. So the Water Board and DTSC have an integrated intake approach where whether you go to the Water Board first or you come to DTSC first, we have a conversation. We have the same intake application. There's a hyperlink here. It's called the Request for Lead Agency Oversight application. It's an online application. In fact, we use the same portal for this process as we do for the ECRG. And we coordinate, we have a conversation, and between us, we make a determination as to which agency is the best fit for that particular site. And in the process that, Greg just walked us through, the idea is that we are going to start having similar conversations with the local agencies as well. So in essence, the starting point doesn't matter as much because at least from a conceptual standpoint, the local agencies and the state agencies will be talking to each other every time we take on a site. So I just wanted to kind of let everybody know that. For us, and I think for the Water Board as well, because agreement development does take some time and we have an ECRG application deadline of the 4th of April, we want to make sure that you come to us with your complete application prior to the 7th of March. And these regulatory oversight agreements are all fee-for-service agreements. So these are an eligible cost under the ECRG, but that's the way most of these agencies are structured, to be fee-for-service for voluntary agreements. When DTSC is the lead agency, we most likely will bring you in under a standard voluntary agreement. We have different agreement types, but this is the one that's going to be the preferred agreement for EG projects. It includes site-specific details, it includes a scope of work, and it includes an estimate of what our oversight charges are going to be. And the reason why I wanted to point that out is because it's important for you to be aware of what those charges are, because those get included in your budget that we discussed in yesterday's ECRGenius webinar. And the signed agreement, as I mentioned before, will be incorporated into the broader ECRG agreement. For DTSC agreements, an advance payment is required, and but it's going to be waived for all ECRG applications. We just have to kind of go through that process where the agreement will say, we'll ask you to pay an upfront payment of 50%, and then you'll just send us a quick note saying, I'm an ECRG applicant and I'm not in a position to make this payment, and we'll waive that payment. We will coincide the start of technical work with hopefully the approval of ECRG grant, where we'll have scoping meetings and start working you through that environmental investigation and cleanup process. And the bills will be sent on a quarterly basis, and grantees will include that in their invoice reimbursement requests. The Water Board process is actually very similar. As I mentioned, it's the same starting point, the request for lead agency oversight application. They go through the same coordination that we do. They have the same deadline, and oh, there you go. Sorry, did I just go the wrong way? There you go. Sorry. One of the things that I really wanted to point out for working with the Water Board is that the Water Board, when someone goes in and requests to enter into an agreement for oversight, they oftentimes use a cleanup and abatement order. Now, the cleanup and abatement order, because it's an order, it's not, that site becomes ineligible for ECRG funding. So when you have that conversation with a water board, if that is in fact your preferred agency, just make sure that you are getting into a cost recovery agreement, which is ECRG eligible. Same thing, like I just mentioned, the process is very similar to what we have for DTSC, but I really wanted to very strongly emphasize that you don't accidentally get into the wrong type of oversight order instead of an agreement. So just go into that with your eyes open and asking the right questions. Natasha, who's our Flux architect, just included these slides for you to just kind of have a refresher on starting the lead agency oversight application. It's the same front page that we have for Flux. And you click on that particular button and you can start a new application and use the step-by-step guide. You can go to the Flux user guide, which is hyperlinked over here. But obviously, this is a much more straightforward application, and in terms of volume, it's a little bit smaller than a lot smaller than what we do in the ECRG applications. It's just simple site information, site history. We want to know about what the site history circumstances are, and that information we already have because you are obviously getting ready to get into an ECRG application. There's a lot of overlap. We try to think about what we could do about converging these, but because they are two separate programs and not always necessarily overlapping, it was difficult for us to kind of roll everything into a one-stop shop from an application perspective. And this is a question we get asked a lot. Oftentimes we recognize that the municipalities, nonprofits, tribes, and other applicants that we're working with may only want to get into an agreement with us or with the water board or with the local agencies if they are going to get the ECRG grant. And we understand that, like, that is the reality, because we don't have, a lot of our applicants do not have that kind of funding to be able to work on these sites without the ECRG funding. So when the decisions are released, you can either decide to continue to work with us or the water board, and billing will commence like a standard project. You can place the site on hold as you pursue other funding, which means it kind of, we won't have to reopen the agreement depending on the timing, but it's just sort of there on hold for a certain amount of time until we decide it's no longer viable. Or you just terminate the agreement. And basically it's simple, send us a letter or the water board letter saying, I didn't get the funding, please go ahead and terminate the agreement. We are not aware exactly of what that process is for the local agencies if you are in fact working with them. And I would suggest that when you start the dialogue with them about starting an agreement simply for the sake of being eligible for the ECRG, please let them know that if you don't get your funding, what your options will be, because there's so many agencies. It's just, we didn't feel we could give one answer. I also wanted to emphasize that, generally being released from these agreements from our perspective and the water board's perspective is not going to be a big deal at all. However, if we look at your site and we determine that there is a very high risk associated with the contamination to the point that public health and the environment is in some kind of immediate danger or threat, then that's the one sticky situation where it would be difficult, for all of us, because we may end up having to issue an order for future work. And that's a very specific, that's a very specific threshold, a very high threshold. So, there are a lot of hypotheticals of what could be associated with this, but most of the sites that we have seen in the pre-qualifying application, we had 88 sort of test sites that had come through. For most of those sites, it wouldn't be a big deal for us to walk away from that. So I know it seems scary, the idea that we will issue an order under this very specific circumstance, but I can assure you it's not a decision that we take lightly. And if we do have to go that route, it will be because we have common goals to protect human health and the environment and make sure that we are in knowledge of something, pretty significant that we'll deal with it. Now, I'm just going to move into providing an overview of the cleanup process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I did want to provide a brief overview. This is a figure that kind of takes us through the entire general process. We just start with an agreement. We scope out the project so that we understand what the tasks are going to be. There's an evaluation phase, which is basically assessing, investigating, collecting samples and understanding what the environmental conditions are at the site. Then we may go into a cleanup, the implementation of a cleanup, and then there's some, long-term ramifications under certain circumstances, with, of course, public participation and tribal consultation happening on an as-need basis based on the specific circumstances of the sites. Scoping meetings is something we're really highly emphasizing for all of our voluntary agreements, and we have been for a while, but in particular for the ECRG. Whether you're working with us or whether you're working with the water board or with a local agency, we highly recommend that the first step in your project is to discuss the history, the conceptual site model, which includes exposure pathways and the media that are going to be addressed through this work. And we want to see, risk assessment and models that are going to be used, and really understand the exit strategy of the project, and kind of starting at the end and designing a project around that. Essentially, in a way, you've already scoped out your project, because a lot of the questions that we ask in the application for the ECRG touches upon so many of these things. But that application is between sort of DTSC and the applicant. So it is important to have these discussions with the regulatory agency's project management team, which may be different than the team who's helping develop the application. So I just wanted to emphasize that, very strongly, and it's a best practice that we think everyone can really benefit from. From an investigation perspective, the whole idea is that we want to collect data to determine what the chemicals of concern are, how deep and how wide the contamination has spread, where the contamination came from, and if that source still exists. We want to understand the risks to human health and the environment. And oftentimes this is an iterative process. You may not get everything in that first investigation and may have to go back in a loop. And that's why, once again, these scoping meetings are really important to have before you submit each document. So you can have that conversation with your regulator and really understand what the regulators are looking for. From the ECRG, and once again, this is something I recommend for any voluntary project, is try to upfront load your investigations to get as much data as possible so that you minimize the time it takes to go in these smaller circles of collecting data by piece. And so it's just something that I can't stress enough. And I think that when you are working with your regulators and designing your scopes of work, try to really front-end load your investigation so you get to your decision as quickly as possible. When the investigation has determined that contamination exists at the site at levels that pose a risk and there's a complete exposure pathway, that's when you get back to the table and scope out what the cleanup is going to be. What are your cleanup goals? Are your cleanup goals compatible with the proposed uses of the site? And be aware that if the cleanup is done at a level that doesn't require any kind of monitoring or restriction, we may need to bring in some land use covenants there. Tribal and public engagement is recommended, sometimes required actually for the cleanup phase, and so is a CEQA, or California Environmental Quality Act compliance. For those of you who are on the development side, and oftentimes there is CEQA that's being done for the larger reuse project, which is great. Oftentimes we can piggyback off of that for the cleanup as well. It really depends on the timing. If they are, if the CEQA is still open, then that's something we can piggyback off of. But if we have to do a cleanup specific CEQA, that's something that we can do fairly easily. The endpoints, which can actually occur even at the investigation phase, at the investigation phase, you can end up with a no further action or a no further action with a land use covenant. That would be that if the site is currently zoned for industrial and commercial uses only, and that's its only proposed use, at an investigation, we can end right there. And the same thing applies to cleanups. You can have a cleanup that is, the land can be made available for any kind of use, regardless of the zoning. That's when it's just a clean walk away, no further action. And then there's these other levels of no further action with a land use covenant, where you may have some kind of restriction in place, or no further action with some longer term operation and maintenance requirements. So an example would be if your building requires a vapor barrier because of volatile organic compound contamination. So that's when you'd have a cleanup that says this cleanup is approved with the exception of ongoing compliance with the land use covenant and an operation and maintenance plan. And the O&M plans require a financial set aside. We have some information on that process in the ebook, the quick reference guide books that Greg hyperlinked earlier in the presentation for anyone who's interested in learning more about what that means. And that brings me to the close of today's presentation. I'm going to turn it back to Natalie to see if there are any questions.
Yes, thank you, Miriam. We have a few questions. So the first one we have here is Stephen Stower. Can you please post the link to the AB 304 registration page? So it's my understanding there isn't necessarily a registration page, but Devin did repost the link that was in the presentation so that there's a quick resource guide. And Greg, did you want to add anything to that just to clarify the process?
Yeah, and I really just want to drive home the point that an applicant looking for oversight does not have responsibilities under AB 304. AB 304 compliance is the responsibility of the local agency itself. But if you know that you are applying for oversight from a local agency that isn't one of the four that we mentioned earlier, just let whoever your contact is at that agency know that they need to be complying with AB 304 for your project to be eligible. And again, if that's outside of Orange County Healthcare Agency, Santa Clara County Department of Environmental Health, San Diego Department of Environmental Health and Quality, and Alameda County Department of Environmental Health. So, thanks.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah. Okay, so the next question we have is from Mark Glassock. LA County Parks is concerned about timing. Establishing a voluntary oversight agreement takes time and was not mentioned in the pre-application. We have super impactful projects, but this is a curveball we're struggling to wedge into our workflow.
Okay, thank you for that question. If you work with Greg to set up a voluntary agreement with the Department of Toxic Substances Control, that's not going to be a roadblock or an issue at all. We can control that value chain completely. And Greg has a process in place to get you into an agreement. From our perspective, at least, I understand the county may have some issues, but we can take care of our thing really quickly. I'd encourage you to go ahead and get in touch with him and we can set something up. In fact, if I recall, LA County Parks had multiple applications. We can even get into a multi-site agreement where we do one agreement for several sites and work things out that way. If you were working with the water board or with another local agency, then we're not able to help as much. But we really think that you had some excellent projects in the pre-app, and we would really, love to see those come through. We don't want to see agency oversight as a roadblock for you.
Thanks, Miriam. He has another question here, Mark. For site-specific investigations where we have little known information on existing conditions, how can we best budget for costs of the oversight agency? We're concerned we're not budgeting costs appropriately and may be stuck with a bill we cannot pay if we don't scope the oversight agency's involvement and costs correctly.
Okay, and that's another reason why we ask that the agency oversight agreement is a part of the application, because that agreement should have a cost estimate associated with it. If it's an agreement that's if it's a new agreement, it definitely will. If it's an agreement in process, most agencies, at least us and the water board, we provide annual cost estimates. That annual cost estimate can be the one to be part of the estimation process for the ECRG. Under any circumstances, I'd advise just that conversation to happen with the regulator and to pop in those costs. And then you can, looking at, if it's an existing project, I mean, you can even look at the invoice history and make some extrapolations based on that. For anything more specific, I think we're happy to have a one-on-one conversation about this.
Yeah, thank you, Miriam, for offering that. I think some applicants will definitely need that. Okay, so next question is from Neil Duran. Can the applicant request DTSC or RWQCB oversight, one versus the other?
Yes, you can work with a local agency, with DTSC, or with the water board. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, when working with the water board, just be careful that you get into a cost recovery agreement and not an order, because cleanup and abatement orders right now are considered to be orders and render the site ineligible to receive ECRG funds.
And one other point to make too is you can have a preference and you can request it at the state and local level, but ultimately the state and local agencies kind of put their heads together and make the final decision on which agency is the most appropriate for regulatory oversight.
Great, thank you so much for pointing that out. Yes, that is true.
Thanks. Okay, the next question is from Colette Monell. We already have a signed voluntary agreement with the Los Angeles County Fire Department Site Mitigation Unit, who has approved the removal action work plan to address metals. We are applying for a cleanup grant for the metals. The site was transferred from the Regional Water Board to Los Angeles County because the petroleum impact related to the UST was closed. It doesn't seem reasonable to transfer oversight again. So what can they do, Miriam? What are your suggestions?
Yes, so my suggestion is don't transfer oversight. I don't think the water board wants it back. If you're working with LA County SMU, then continue to work with them, but ask Richard to go ahead and send us, the package that's required under AB 304. We will be able to turn it around fairly quickly, and there's no need to switch. And we wouldn't recommend switching. Our greater emphasis is to just make sure that the local agencies send the paperwork that's needed to DTSC and the water board, and so we can give them that approval and give them that check that they need against their regulatory oversight approval box.
Great. And Mark Glassock replied, thank you for your responsible follow-up with Greg. So thank you for your questions. We know that it's a case-by-case thing, and there's so many different local agencies. And so we just want to support this process to be as easy as possible. Okay, last question is from Greg Dickinson. Does the ECRG program define how much of the available funding is allocated among the 3 grant programs? This is more of a general question. Community-wide assessments, environmental site investigations, and environmental cleanup. So among those 3, how much of the funding associated with each of the 3 grant programs was encumbered by the preliminary applications that were submitted before the program went officially live?
Okay, great. That's excellent questions. So I'll go with the second one first. Nothing was encumbered at all. The pre-qualifying application was really a way for us to learn about who the applicants were and what the sites were. So we really appreciate everyone's efforts who participated in that, because it really helped us develop this final application. So nothing's been encumbered, and it's all, this is a new process. The full application, other than the pre-qualifying applicants having a head start in terms of application completion, because their data transfers over and their information transfers over. This is the application is open to everyone, regardless of whether or not they participated in the pre-qual. Regarding the first question, we don't have any fixed allocations. We haven't made any determinations that a certain percentage or a certain dollar figure will go to a certain type of application. What we did see in the pre-qual was there was the largest number of applications, and the largest number of the dollar ask was with cleanups, and then investigations, and then community-wide assessments.
Great, thank you, Miriam. Okay, next question. We have another one from Leslie Palaron. We are working with the Alameda County Department of Environmental Health, and we have an agreement with them. Is DTSE going to have additional cleanup requirements in addition to ACDEH's, so Alameda County Department of Environmental Health's requirements?
No, we will not. We respect the authority of approved local agencies, and for those sites that are not under our regulatory authority, we will respect the decision-making process of the other agencies.
And kind of from a broader perspective too, AB 304 and other legislation requires that the cleanup goals and cleanup completion conducted at the local level be reported to the state, both the DTSC and Water Board. So we are kept in the loop at really critical stages of projects. So DTSC will get notified when cleanup is being conducted and being completed, and we can provide comments during a public comment period or anything like that as well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think we've always been somewhat engaged in all of those processes, regardless of who is the lead agency.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying. And it looks like we don't have any more questions. So I just want to thank everyone for joining. And just a reminder that anyone who's registered for the webinars will get the slides, and the recordings are on CCLE TV on our YouTube. And so you'll get all that information. Even if you haven't attended, people will get that, and we automatically add you to our ECRG email list if you're registered for any webinars. But if you have any problems, please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions, and please sign up for Calendly TA, because we're here to give you free technical assistance and answer questions no matter what part of the process you are in. So thank you for joining us. Would you like to say anything else, Miriam or Greg?
I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. I hope we were able to answer your questions. If not, as Natalie said, please reach out to CCLE for some more specific things. Reach out to us directly as well. And we hope that we're trying our best to make the process as easy on everyone as possible. And so, be patient with us. It's a new program, but we really do want to make a difference in all of your communities. So thank you so much for joining us today. Greg,
Yes, and thank you.
Add anything?
Yes, I wanted to add one small piece. If you are applying for state oversight, either with DTSC or the Water Board, you can use DTSC's same application portal that you are doing the ECRG application in to fill out the request for lead agency oversight application. And that, like I said, that application is available in the same Flux application portal that you're using for ECRG. And if you have any questions with that, you can email the same email address, the application portal at dtsc.ca.gov.
Great.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
you, everyone.
Bye-bye.